Hi everyone, Professor King here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about literary terms as they pertain to drama. So we'll be talking about drama as a genre, some literary terms that are associated with it. I'll do a quick review of dramatic and narrative plot, but not too much because we already went over that with the short story. And we'll talk protagonist, antagonist, and some other stuff. So I'm just going to take it to the share screen right now. What am I doing? Taking it to the share screen. Sorry, it's been a minute since I made one of these videos, so I feel like I'm a little out of it, not going to lie. All right, so I'll take it to the share screen and then I will pull up our slides. All right. So in this unit, we're going to be covering drama and the novel. And so first we're going to do drama. There are two plays from which you can choose to read. The first is Sarah Kane's Blasted. If that is a little too intense for you, I've given students the option of doing Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, which is older, a little more sort of standard realism, and much less violent, we'll say. So if violence and really abstract, surreal, heightened sexual situations are not your thing, then I would say to go with A Doll's House. But if you want to get really weird and creepy and disturbing and you're okay with that, then Sarah Kane's Blasted is right up your alley. Anyway, let's talk about drama. So drama is performed fiction. What does that mean? Well, that means anything that has a script, anything that follows a play, anything, it may have dialogue. Sometimes some dramas are completely wordless, but it is performed. It's on a stage, even television, film, all of that stems from the dramatic tradition. So when you're thinking about TV shows you like to watch or films you like to watch, Broadway plays, musicals, all of that is encompassed within drama. So it's performed fiction. And then a play is a type of drama in which characters or sometimes ideas are represented by actors. So the reason I say characters or sometimes ideas, you'll start to see, especially in the 20th century, when we start to go away from what is traditionally called teacup realism, that anything can be a character, right? Like an animal or a symbol, an idea. Once we start getting sort of really surreal and abstract, we start to see that. And that teacup realism, what that term essentially means, it's slightly derogatory. It's sort of something that came out of the 20th century where artists were moving away from dramatic representations that were super realistic, meaning, if someone is supposed to be drinking a cup of tea, they literally have the teacup in their hand. And so when you start to see at the end of the 20th century with people like Sarah Kane, I can't really think of anything else right now, but something will come to mind. You see these people starting to really abandon that hyper-realistic mode for things that are, again, more abstract, more avant-garde, more surreal. And this really dovetails nicely with the movement from modernism to postmodernism. So you have this sort of fractured, Dadaistic approach to literature and art, and you start to see that with the surrealist abstract elements in drama as well. So Sarah Kane is going to be moving away from that teacup realism into more surrealist stuff, whereas Ibsen, because he's writing in the 19th century, is still very much in the mode of, the thing that's on the stage looks like real life. It's real people. They're wearing real clothes. They're doing real person things. There's not this sort of fantastical element to it like there would be in other more recent plays. So the dialogue then in a play is comprised of stage directions and then the uttered language of the characters. So a script, right? You have usually it's in italics or brackets. You'll have the stage direction where that's literally the director telling the actors or the playbill telling the audience what's the physical movement that's going to happen or the setup of how the stage looks. They don't say that out loud because it's for the audience to see, but it's so that even movements can be taken as symbol, as metaphor, as setting the tone, as contributing to the plot, right? And not just the dialogue. The dialogue also does include, however, clearly uttered language because this is English, right? We're talking about language. And so for the most part, characters in plays, etc., have some sort of verbal communication. Again, not always, but for the most part, right? It's that dialogue, that text, those words that they say to one another. And those are so important because, as I've mentioned several times in this class, every single stage direction, every single bit of dialogue, every single word uttered, whether you are aware of it or not, it's all deliberate on the part of the director and the actors working together to create a dominant impression. So when you read Ibsen and when you read Sarah Kane and you see some of these things that the characters are saying and you see these stage directions that are being shared, pay very close attention to them because no one in drama is just saying, "Oh, I'm just going to throw this in there," right? It's a work of art. So only what is absolutely necessary is in there and nothing extraneous or superfluous. Keep that in mind. So words are very important. And that's what we have to focus on, clearly, because we're in a literature class. And finally, in the case of drama, the theme reflects some elemental truth about the human condition. Now, I don't want people to confuse theme with moral, right? Morals are what fables do, like the moral of the story is what a fable does. It's usually didactic, meaning it's trying to teach you some sort of ethical lesson, right? Whereas theme is not necessarily a statement or an argument or an object lesson or something like that. It's just sort of an idea, right? A complex idea. And in drama, it tends to center on some elemental truth about the human condition because, again, we're talking about performers, we're talking about people or symbolic substitutes thereof. So if that's the case, we have to, consider kind of what the director, what the writer is saying about the human condition by presenting these characters in such a way, by presenting this plot in such a way, by using these specific words in the ways that they are used, by having this imagery that you can literally see, not just on the page, but when you go see the play in front of you. Drama is meant to be consumed as a performance, right? Even more so than reading the playbill. But we're lit majors, so we're going to read instead of viewing. Yeah. The general direction of dramatic or narrative plot, I already talked about this when we went over the unit on short stories, so I won't beat any dead horses or belabor any points. But just remember that we have exposition, which is where essentially like characters, setting, early events are introduced. Then we have a catalyzing event where we start to see the rising action, right? The action that leads towards the climax. Then we have the climax, which is, this is the most exciting part in the story. I don't think that's the best way of describing it. Always think of the climax as the point of no return. In other words, in the diegetic world of the play, once the climactic event happens, there's no going back to the way things were before. And so what's a little misleading about this chart is that it looks like the climax falls right in the middle. And that's usually not the case. The climax generally falls closer to the end of the story, because then you have the falling action. You have the events that the climax, by changing, right, the whole sort of narrative dynamics of the story or of the play, creates new actions, which are the falling action, which lead us to the end of the story where the resolution and the denouement occur. In the resolution, what's resolved can be resolved. What can't be resolved is sort of left, agreed upon that it can't be. And then the denouement is sort of the final reflection on all of this, right? So keep all that in mind. And if you want a more, again, if you want a more thorough explanation of this, you can go back to my video on short stories. I think it was my first video. All right. In drama, in narrative, we have the protagonist. And the protagonist is the main figure in a work of narrative fiction. But they're not, here's a couple things you have to keep in mind. Get out of your head the notion of the good guy, because the protagonist is not necessarily always the good guy. The protagonist can be the bad guy. The protagonist can be neutral. So, for example, in The Great Gatsby, right, Nick, our narrator, is really the protagonist because he's telling the story from his viewpoint. And even though the story is about this character, Jay Gatsby, we don't really, we don't have as much knowledge of Jay as we do Nick, right? It can be argued that Jay Gatsby is the protagonist, but we can also argue that Nick is. I'll just say that. The protagonist, in that case, though, the protagonist is neutral, right? For the most part. Nick has opinions and things, but he's not like a hero or a villain, right? In Breaking Bad, the image that you see to the right here, Walter White is the protagonist, in that the vast majority of what happens in that television series revolves around him. Is he a good guy? That is, you know, for all intents and purposes, let's just say no. we can definitely debate this, and you know, we have discussions of things like anti-hero and what have you. But if we were to look at his rap sheet, you know, his body count or whatever you want to call it, we might not necessarily think of him as a good guy, quote unquote. So that's an example where the protagonist is not necessarily a hero or a good guy. So keep those in mind. It's just the main figure in the work of narrative fiction, or the character around whom a bulk of the plot revolves, or who affects most of the action. So that's why I said in The Great Gatsby, you could debate, it could be Nick, it could be Gatsby, but you know, that's why literature's fun. You can debate these things. It's not math. There's more than one right answer. All right, so next is the antagonist. And the antagonist is the character or the thing. It doesn't always have to be a character. It can be a natural event. It can be society. It can be even the protagonist's own psychological makeup. If we think back to like Edgar Allan Poe, and how a lot of times the antagonist is just the speaker's own paranoia, or the speaker's own sort of crumbling psychological landscape, then we can see that an antagonist doesn't need to be a character. If anyone's ever read Stephen Crane's The Open Boat has nature as an antagonist, which is not uncommon for naturalist texts like The Open Boat. So it's the thing or character that most challenges the protagonist within the narrative. again, it's not necessarily the bad guy. If we think of like, you know, just try and put what you know about J.K. Rowling at this point on the shelf, and just think about the character of Severus Snape. Yes, when we first meet him for quite some time, we think that he's the bad guy. But ultimately, what we find out about Severus Snape as a possible antagonist is that he's a very complicated character, and he's not the bad guy. He may have to be on the bad guy side with, you know, in Slytherin or whatever, but he actually ultimately becomes a very complex antagonist, complicated antagonist. And that in and of itself could make for the argument of a really cool essay. Not in this class because we're not reading Harry Potter, so relax. But you know, it's the character thing that most challenges the protagonist within a narrative. And there are definitely books in the Harry Potter series, or at least chapters, right, where you could argue that he's the antagonist. Yeah, it's not always the villain or bad guy. Sorry, that's a typo there. And then I think that, you know, that really says what we need it to say in terms of drama. A couple of things I want to talk about in relation to the plays themselves. I don't want to give anything away because it's your job to read these plays. But like I said, Sarah Kane is going to be a little bit more of a challenge in that there's some stuff there. First of all, there's disturbing imagery. So if you're you know, a person who doesn't want to really read about violent or very sexual or sexually violent stuff, you may want to go with Ibsen, and that's totally fine. You have that option. War, mutilation, you know, all these things are in Sarah Kane, so just keep that in mind. I know it's coming to me. Just give me 1 minute. The brain is slowly processing. When we look at Sarah Kane, the main thing I want you to remember is the surrealist or abstract aspect. She is still an artist. She is still creating a world of characters and setting and plot and backstory and all the things that go into a narrative or drama. It's just a little bit fantastical, right? Meaning that it's not all fully situated in a hyper realistic setting. It's a little abstract, it's a little off, it's a little surreal, it's a little weird. So keep that in mind when you're reading Kane, but also keep in mind, why would she do this? Why is she creating this very strange and disturbing story for us to watch? What's she trying to get us to think, feel, believe, or act on? Everything in there is deliberate. Everything in there is necessary according to her artistic vision. So if that's the case, pay close attention to characters, to language, to setting, to plot, to all of the to the imagery, to all these things. And then think about the why. Why does she want her audience to be subjected is one way of saying it. Why would she want her audience to watch this or to read it? What is she trying to get us to see figuratively? Ibsen, again, is going to be a lot more straightforward. It's very teacup realism. If a character is supposed to be in a ball gown, a character is going to be in a ball gown. If a character is supposed to be reading a letter, the character has a letter in their hand. So it's going to be a lot more easy to interpret on that level. However, everything in there is deliberate. Nothing in there is extraneous according to Ibsen's view of how the text should be. So why is he creating this text? What's he trying to get us to think, see, feel, etc. about Nora, about her husband Torvald, about the other more minor characters in the play, about notions of gender or wealth disparity, honesty, character, morality, religion, all so many more things. Same with Cain. So many different things can be talked about in relation to these plays. So your job is really not to talk about everything because you don't have enough room, but to home in on the stuff you do want to talk about. So keep that in mind for the discussion board, which is up. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to help. I hope everyone is not just surviving, but thriving. And if you're not thriving and just surviving, that's okay too. I'm here. If you ever need to, I always like to say, if you got nothing nice to say, come sit next to me or email me or Zoom me. So I hope that helps. Hit me up if you have any questions. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, day, whenever it is for you.